Good morning and welcome to another Sunday Life class. We are on March the 23rd, 2005. And so we are going to enter what we call our safe space of three practices, which I think we can talk about, that being we breathe, we pray, and then we learn together. So let's start off with our series of 3, 4, 5 breaths, which we pretty much know by now, but I think this is just kind of enough to get us in the present moment. And by that, I mean the intake of 3 good breaths, 3 of those, hold for 4, and then pursing your lips, a very slow exhale for a count of 5. So let's start our first round. In for 3, hold for 4, out for slow 5. Let's do this again. In for 3, hold for 4, very slowly out for 5, feeling your body relax, your feet on the floor. Round 3, in for 3, hold for a long 4, and exhale for a slow 5. And just pause, not too eager to come back, feeling yourself in your chair, feeling your weight in your feet grounded on the floor, being aware of the sounds around you, and yet the silence increasing around you. This is your time. I would like to share with you this morning one of my favorite meditations and prayers, and actually this is called a Sabbath blessing, and we credit the founder of the 24/7 international movement, which originates out of Great Britain. There's a man by the name of Peter Gregg, who's a very prolific author you may have heard of. So I'd like to offer this today as a prayer of introduction. May this day bring Sabbath rest to my heart and my home. May God's image in me be restored, and my imagination in God be restored. May the gravity of material things be lightened, and the relativity of time slow down. May I know grace to embrace my own finite smallness in the arms of God's infinite greatness. May God's word feed me and His Spirit lead me into the week and into this life to come. Amen. And I would add, into this information to come, and may it find root within us today. We're proceeding on into our series called Reparenting, which is really the understanding that in order for us to heal from our trauma, we have to reparent ourselves. We have to give ourselves the things that we just didn't get growing up. We have to actively try to meet the needs that were not met. And we have to handle that wounded part of us to help ourselves heal. So last week we started specifically looking at the concept of an inner child. What is that thing? What does it really mean? And I gave you all some stories that talked about how the joke is really on me, how I laughed and thought it was very silly and very stupid 40 years ago, and it turned out to be the very key to my growth, to my inner healing, and really to follow what I feel like is my higher power's purpose for me in the world to help others. Someone has said this: trauma can only heal when we are seen in it. Trauma can only heal when we are seen in it. Now, that may not make any sense right now, but think about this. That's why the child froze. It's because they weren't seen. Child was not seen. It's in therapy and inner child work that a child can finally feel seen. See, when I work with somebody, or Tim Fletcher or his staff work with somebody, we see that person as that child in the middle of that trauma, and that may be for the very first time, or any of the healers in this world. And that may be the first time that they're ever seen as that little child. I remember the first time I was ever held by another woman, and she saw me as I had wanted my mom to see me, and touch me as I wanted my mom to. And it was, I can't even tell you what happened, but I just needed to be seen, I needed to be felt, I needed to be heard. So some of the things that we hear all the time are these words: I never felt seen as a child. So let's just say that a child grows up in a very reasonably healthy, trauma-free home, and they go through a very painful event, and they're seen pretty much, and the parents come and they validate it, and they validate the pain that the child's feeling, and the child feels like they see me, they get it, they care. But what happens when a child doesn't feel seen and they're going through pain and trauma? And they clearly have this impression, I just don't feel like anybody's here for me. No, nobody gets what I'm feeling. And so we have to shut down and we have to freeze. So what this is saying is, in adult life, they never healed. And so in adult life, they finally feel like somebody sees me, gets me, sees my pain. Somebody sees my trauma. So in validating it, that's what we're doing when we do inner child work. I'll never forget the first time that I was looked at, and I knew through that look of compassion that I was getting something that made up for something. I knew I was getting something that made up for a deep, dark hole. Another quote is, and this is so interesting because Clay, in his sermon this morning, said this exact quote: if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it. It's the idea that the wounded part of me, we might say, oh, that doesn't affect me, that's in the past. Well, no, it is affecting us. And in some way, we are transmitting it. So let me give you, just last week, we gave a definition of what we mean when we talk about an inner child. I'm going to give you somebody else's definition. This is one Tim Fletcher passed along. It's very similar, but it might help you see just a few new aspects. The inner child exists as the childlike aspect within your unconscious mind. It reflects the child we once were in both his or her positive and negative aspects, our unmet needs and suppressed childhood emotions. I want to bring in John Bradshaw again, as I did last week. I talked about my original copy of Homecoming, is one of his first books. I think it was in maybe 1996, 2002 when it first came out. He was the first person to really begin to write about this. And he talked about also the part of us that's our innocence and our natural enthusiasm and our creativity. And he called this part of us the wonder child. You know, and I had always wondered, where did my wonder child go? I'd have these like little glimpses of something that I knew was delightful. I knew that would give me joy. And then I would either drink to shut it down, or I would be in depression, or my inner critic would just come full on and say, no, no, no. You know, there would be something. There would just be a whole bag of things that would come up, or I would feel great guilt for feeling that, almost like a loss of pleasure. It wasn't okay to feel pleasure, you know, to shut that down. And now, today, I realized that that was my wonder child trying to survive, trying to come up. So that's all waiting within us. Our wonder child is waiting for us. Your wonder child is waiting for us. So the repressed emotions refer to all the things we were taught as a child, things we were taught not to feel if we wanted to receive love. In other words, if I were to wanting to just explode in tears and cry and talk about what I felt, but instead was told just to suck it up, be a big girl, okay, those contents would be repressed. I'm just using this as an example. And that was a pattern. Then I would probably grow up with the idea or the belief that if I want to receive love, I've got to just continue to really suck that up and disconnect from the things that make me feel sad or angry or hurt. So a question I get regularly is, why is working with the inner children, why is my inner child essential in healing from trauma? So one way to look at it is this: our deepest wounds are carried by a part of us somewhere within. Our deepest wounds are carried by a part of us somewhere within. And that's where it's so hard to know where to start when a person says, you know, I'm really in pain, but I have no idea where it's coming from. It just all seems so mysterious. You know, that wound is carried within me somewhere. So that's what we're calling the inner child. And until that part heals, we can't heal totally from all that trauma. So where in the world would a person start? What's a connection point? So how do we begin to connect with this inner child? So a lot of people will find objects helpful to them to connect. And I meant to go ahead and do this and bring to you all maybe next time, because I've done a lot of spring cleaning, and I found a family album. There's few pictures I have from when our house burned down, but there's a couple in particular that are pretty good examples. Also, you know me, of remembering how I felt during these times. I think you all get a kick out of them. But photographs from when they were a child that just me seeing it brings back, oh my goodness, you know, what was really going on versus what was photographed. So for some people, you can find a photograph that'll bring back sort of this, yeah, I can see that pain, or I can see that anger, or I can see that disgust in my eyes, or the trauma I went through in my eyes, and it just brings you back. Other people, if they have a stuffed animal or a security blanket like when they were a child, it can kind of like bring them back there to the feelings they had. this may sound a little extreme, but I've known a lot of people that actually for them, and I knew a woman in another country that I did a lot of online work with, that she actually had a doll made that she had her face put on it. She had such a hard time connecting photograph of her face as a little girl. And, that was really what she needed to carry around with her. And it was amazing the impact. Other people who are more artistic can actually draw a photo of themselves. They have to have something absolutely concrete so that they can do this work. There is a real interesting guy, and Tim Fletcher got familiar with him, and I have too, that was a very successful fellow that's really rekindled a lot of John Bradshaw's stuff. His name is Nate Postworthwaite, which is an interesting last name, and he quit a really high-profile 70-plus work week job, and he'd had 20 years of therapy, but what really has saved him was this getting to know his inner child after all this success. And he has come out with one of the best how-to journals on finding your inner child that there is. And not only that, he has developed this online community for men and women to just come and share about how to connect after all these years from an adult place. And it's so wonderful to see this work blossoming all over the world now about people finding joy and going back and finding that wonder child within them, especially in our digital age with things getting so bad. And when you read Nate's bio, it just brought me to tears because it's like so many cases that I'm familiar with that he went back and finally got some answers on his lifetime sexual abuse and was able to go back and through a process forgive and emerge forward through that, and then use his own trauma survivorship to help other people, to help these thousands of people. And he just really believed that he was unlovable. And so then he just went into workaholism to create a life where he attempted to never think about that narrative. He just became an adult who overextended himself in work relationships and anything that would give him space away from himself. So he had a very difficult time embracing the idea that he could ever feel whole. And like me, this is a quote from his work. He said, "The first time my therapist explained inner child work, I absolutely refused to participate. I did not understand the concept of an innocent kid inside myself who still felt the impacts of trauma. It took me a long time to even warm up to the idea." I think that's what I said about myself pretty much last week. But Nate says, once I got to know him and I saw what he was carrying, I made it my mission to let him know that I am here and I will always protect him. I felt alone and out of place most of my life. The connection with my inner child has offered me the most in-depth and powerful sense of wholeness. And here's a quote that I love, that I found to be so true. For me, it has been the sacred process of feeling at home inside my body and offering my inner child space to rest. And I think that's why John entitled this book Homecoming. Coming home to our bodies, coming home to rest. And just as an aside, being an eating disorder survivor, I think that, that is the link for many of us who've survived those, that is coming home and resting inside your body and finding perfect peace. That's been the thing that most people have been searching for. Being willing to look back at the places that hurt so that we can understand better and connect better with ourselves takes a lot of courage. And how do we begin to even do that? If someone sits down with me, or if somebody sits down with you, let's say that a couple of years from now you found some of this helpful, and you just are in a situation with somebody and they're interested, and how do you help them begin to zero in on the wounded parts of themselves? So beginning to help them understand their childhood. There's some questions, and these are the questions, I'm wondering if you might want to gather together and just kind of work on yourselves to begin to ask yourself, to give you an idea of what is my inner child like. And you were talking to somebody who is, I mean, my imagery with my doctors started out with a highly fortified stone wall. I remember Dr. Butcher saying, "Now, Anne, picture the Berlin Wall." Okay, maybe say feeling hopeless, right? Okay, so one thing is, say to self, okay, self, talk to me about the trauma or hurts you experienced during your childhood. And one way to do this is just a simple timeline. And I like it, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, little 5 year. Just do a line, nothing fancy, just little milestones. Start simple. And then just identify hurts and unmet needs. They may occur to you totally out of order. It doesn't matter, but just leave yourself space. Had someone who continues after all these years to say, as soon as my little sister was born, my parents never paid any attention to me again. So, right then and there I was 6. Yeah, when so and so was born, there's just that was just a very wounding experience. And then, later on, age 35, fired from my first job, and she's bouncing around, but she's filling her time in unmet need, appreciation, love, recognition. So you see how it would go. So identify the hurts and unmet needs you experienced growing up. And then I know we get tired of hearing about love languages since the book has been so overly popularized. It seems like an old thing, but that can be very helpful. What were the love languages that made you feel loved? Was it acts of service? Was it gifts? Was it touch? Was it made you feel loved as a kid? Not now. Go back. Birthday passed over, no gifts. Well, now you might be fine without that. You got everything you need, but as a 9-year-old, As a kid, what were your dreams? What were your longings of what you wanted when you grew up? What you hoped your life might become? Bring in your list of the 12 needs. Which ones were met not consistently in your life as a child? What do you wish your parents had done for you? This is not a blaming thing. We're just talking about those foundational building blocks. These are things they didn't know to do. You never told them. They couldn't, right? What did you secretly wish? What do you wish they had said to you when you failed in those moments? What did you need to have said to you? What activities did you enjoy as a kid? What were you most curious about as a child? And here's where it kind of gets fun, and there might be a little sharing because we're kind of going back to sort of the same genre in here. What were your favorite songs, your favorite movies, your favorite TV shows, the games you played. What did play look like for you as a child? And this will be very individual. What made you feel seen? What made you feel safe? So within that mix, those are questions that some people today will ask their inner child. And once they identify it, there's just sort of this magnetism where they want to get to know that part of them. And then the question becomes, okay, inner child, when you were neglected, when you were disrespected, when you were told maybe some people, and this is just so awful, but some people were told, you're dumb, you'll never amount to anything, that's pie in the sky, you're shooting for something unrealistic. Do you see how you responded back and then how it affected you? Do you see how those exchanges affected you? Do you see it still turning up today if somebody makes you feel dumb or stupid today? Or if you don't have the answer today? Do you see how that might still be affecting you? Do you have the same patterns that show up today in your behaviors, in your thinking, in your emotions? So the person says, okay, yeah, maybe a little bit. And if they're a person that said, I don't get this inner child stuff, it's not part of my life, then you might say, okay, well, then that is the wounded part of you still showing up today. That's that part of you down in there, still affecting your adult behavior today. So that's a way to help them make a connection between the wound of the past and the behavior of the present. But the point is that part of them was not seen by the parent. There was some part of them, which means that there's something to learn here. And what you can give that person is really seeing them, really being with them. What do you need from me? What is that person's great unmet need that can be met from whatever this relationship might be? Validation? Was their pain denied? Was it minimized? Were they punished for even talking about certain things? So this is not an easy road. We do need to feel pain, almost learn on how to lean into it or embrace it, but then we have to learn to believe that that's not going to be horrible. We're not going to fall down. My sister and I talked about falling down through the hole that we were going to dig to China. We kept digging it in the sandbox, and we thought we were going to come out to China, and then we would fall into outer space. I mean, we literally dug that far in the sandbox, and she wrote a great story about that. But we have these beliefs that there's nobody there to catch us, that we'll never see the light again. But it still feels like that as an adult. We don't really believe those words of God as quoted in Deuteronomy, for underneath you are the everlasting arms of the Lord God. That there is a rock solid place right here where we'll be held and nurtured. This takes practice. So we might ask the person, well, where do you feel that pain today? Do you remember feeling it as a child? Where do you feel it in your body? Most people will say, somewhere here in the gut, deep internally. As an adult, it might show up in their neck, in their shoulders. You might ask them, how does it make you feel? So you want them to begin to feel mindful, to feel the pain on a physical level, not just emotionally, because it's going to show up in the body. I don't need to tell you the amount of studies that have come out and are coming out about the mind and body connection. You're surrounded with them, you've read them, on the origin of all of the maladies in the body, stress related to unhealed trauma. But we know that has been a proven thing, not for every injury, but many. And we have to reparent that part of us that's in pain. So one thing that Tim Fletcher emphasizes is that what happens to many people is as soon as they feel that pain, it's gone from the emotional to the physical, starting to incapacitate someone. As soon as they feel that pain, there's an old internal parent, not literally, old internal parent who is really the inner critic in their brain. And what does that old inner critic in the brain? You quit feeling sorry for yourself because you don't have it as bad as other people. If you had it as bad as they would, why, then you'd really feel bad. So just snap out of it right now. Or some version like that with very sharp, crisp angles, so the words could just beat the words right out of you. Beat the honest expression of feeling and emotion and anguish right out of you. All over again, right? Okay. And so this person could be us. We condemn ourselves. We're hard on ourselves. We judge ourselves for feeling human pain. And so we go, oh, well, now we're going to reparent ourselves. Once we've identified this pain, we need to do what's called, and you all may be familiar with this if you've done some therapy work, hold space for that little child. I'm not going to judge that little child. We're going to be compassionate for that little child. We're going to have empathy for them. We're going to be kind to that little child. And that's how the pain begins to heal. No more minimizing, no more denying, no more judging. Just as though you had a little child with you that fell down, cut their knee. You happen to be a good Samaritan with a Band-Aid box, and we're going to find their mommy and daddy and comfort them just as you would today, just as a stranger would. So we're going to reparent that wounded part of ourselves that we've been punishing and judging for years. So let's say it's us. What we are going to do is to develop compassion for all of ourself, the parts of us that we hate. And yes, we have hated and maybe do hate parts of ourselves. We're going to have compassion for the activities that we did, that we hate, that we want to judge ourselves for our failures. Well, those come out of a little child who was in pain and who was trying to survive. Our little child was trying to survive. Don't ever punish a little child who is trying to survive. Have compassion for the child who was hurting and no one saw them. They were not seen. So we are going to have to change our internal parent from a judgmental, condemning person to a compassionate person for all of ourself. That is what is going to happen. This is what was presented to me years ago. And I thought, that just seemed like an impossible order. It's not. It's not. There's just nowhere else to go if you can't live in this world in that kind of pain. There's nowhere else to go but embrace the path before. And so Tim Fletcher says, now today when I get triggered, I might do some stuff that I hurt others, I fail, instead of beating myself up, I'm going to forgive myself, be compassionate myself, learn so I can grow. There's going to be a change in orientation for how I deal with stuff. So Tim references this workbook that Nate Postlethwaite has done. And he does a timeline that's very similar to what I talked about. But he has 4 lines at the bottom on his timeline, and he asks these questions. How do these traumas show up in your life today? When you think of this trauma, do you see it happening today? How do you see it happening today? Where do you start beating yourself up? Where do you get angry, sad, feel depression or anxiety? How were you wounded? To the best of your ability, write down how it affected us then and how that still shows up today. And then he gives 4 pillars for communicating with our inner child. Number 1, you have to be patient. Your inner child, like we said last week, is very wary of you. It can't trust you. It might not even want to have a relationship with you. You want a relationship with it, but to your inner child, you're a threat because you've hurt them a lot. It wasn't just others who hurt you, and I'm going to put that in the first person. It wasn't just others who hurt me. I abandoned myself. I rejected myself. So why would my inner child trust me? But consistent work where I continue to show up and I know what I'm doing and have the support of other people, I can turn that around. Then as I start to heal, that's going to mean that I'm going to talk about those wounds which were secret. And it's going to make that inner child very nervous that it's going to get hurt again. So I have to go to very safe, very confidential places. And then I'm going to talk about my shame, about how I feel about myself. Then I'm going to talk about how I felt as a child. And my child is used to being hidden away and not talked about. It's very, very, very shy. So I have to be very patient with this process. What if I, as an adult, do the things that could get it hurt again? And I'm not used to having people being kind and patient and listening to me. So if the normal response to this wounded part of myself has been criticism, judgment, horror, disgust, condemnation, abandonment, it just takes a while. It just takes a while. So it's simple in concept to say, well, just be kind to your inner child. But you're going to have days where you want to judge it again or abandon it again. You're going to have days when you're just on autopilot to be unkind to it again. I know I stop myself so much whenever I can. And I go, okay, we're going to be on rewind here. And I'll go, Ann, did you hear what you just said to your inner child? Wow, what's going on with you? You are way too in a hurry. And I'll usually have a flashback. If I'm fortunate, I will have a concrete flashback of being jerked by the arm, or yelled at or something like that. And I'll go, thank you. This is now. This is, What is the compassionate, loving response? Create a new neural plasticity, new wiring. So we also need curiosity about our inner child. We have to want to get to know this child. We want to see them. We want to understand why maybe did they cope the way they did. How did they develop the coping strategies that they did? We've talked about how we develop manipulation as a child, ways to isolate, ways to create fantasies and stories. I mean, there are ingenious ways that the inner child does that. Um, so we need to go in there with the spirit, not as like the professional that's going to go in there with a little set of tools. I'm going to fix my inner child. Mm-mm. We need to go in there as a humble student who wants to get to know them. They are our teachers. And so it's changing our communication so that we're not saying to ourselves as an inner child, well, you just should have done this or you should have done that as you replay that scene out. You know, when I replay that scene about being jerked around by the arm and that I'm being a big bother, I don't go back in there and say, well, you know, you shouldn't have complained in the first place, or you shouldn't have cried, or you shouldn't have. That's not going to do me any good. You can go, you know, you were your little wonder child was playing on the floor with someone else's toys. You were enraptured with that. You didn't understand that it was time to go. You know, you should have cried. That was very rough treatment. Something like that. So, changing how we talk to our inner child. So, when I chastise my inner child and say, you know, yeah, you should have paid attention, you know, you should do what you were told. Just like when I last week said, you know, you should hurry. You know, you're slow. You didn't get those letters out to class, whatever, you know, whatever it was. Those are messages of judgment that show a lot of impatience with the slow process of healing and changing with my own self. And it's slow and it's messy. But it's like Clay said this morning in his sermon, this is the marathon process that we go through until we take our last breath. I'm going to wrap up here with some of the helpful ways that we can tap into connection that are usually suggested, and some of these you've probably done. But tapping in to this gives a lot of clarity and quick connection and gives you long overdue safety to yourself. There's a lot of variations, commonly used practices for the inner child. You can write a letter to different ages of yourself. Dear Nate Postlethwaite says, Dear 7-year-old Nate, and he publishes his letter. I saw the most amazing thing this summer that I've seen in a long time. A woman in her 70s wrote a letter to herself, Dear 8-year-old, whatever her name was, and just a process of transformation over several weeks. And she had 2 narcissistic parents. You can imagine. All of a sudden, she's out creating flower gardens and traveling. She hadn't left her apartment in weeks. Such deep depression. It's very quick, but it sounds so silly that you don't want to do it. But she began to do this, to write a letter to herself and communicate to herself. You can write by telling your inner child how you feel about what you went through as a child, or what you'd like to do for them to keep them safe from now on. And that's what this woman did, how she was going to protect her inner child from further abuse from her family. What some people do is write to their child in their dominant hand, their normal writing hand, and then take their non-dominant hand and have the child write back to them. And that is very, very revealing. So it's like a child's writing. And also, too, answer questions like, what happened today that made you feel uncomfortable? What support do you need? What support did you need in that moment to feel safe? And the child can respond with specific memories that came up. Anything triggered And that as these memories come up, put them on your timeline that you've already started. So there's just a lot of different things that we can do. Those are just a couple of things that we begin to throw out. I want to try to continue next week, particularly with some of the work this past summer that I did with, in our group from all over the world, did with one of our coaches, Debbie, who was particularly incredibly great. And, we have seasoned therapists who have done this for a long time but are really reaching new levels of curiosity and opening up to the wonder child within us so that we can help other people discover their wonder childs for the very first time. We truly believe that Jesus came to give us lives of abundance and joy and a life beyond what we could have dreamed of, and to begin to remove these blockages at any time and at any age is fully possible to us. So I hope you have heard something helpful today, and just know that you are starting on this journey in very good company. Thank you.